The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar titled, Are You Protecting Your Employer Brand During COVID-19? We're really excited to have all of you here and to discuss this topic. I do want to get started by just letting everyone know that during this unprecedented time, we're doing things a little differently. So all of your speakers are working from home. We ask that you please ignore any dogs or children that you may hear in the background because it's bound to happen. And just kind of work with us as we do this in a very different way than we've ever done it before. All right, so let's get started. I do want to say, for those of you who aren't familiar with Insala, we are a company that focuses on talent development, and the software and consulting that we bring to our clients helps them to bring those programs alive and really become successful. We have a variety of software and consulting options that we offer to help with talent development needs, and you can always visit our website for more information on that. But what we're really here to talk about is protecting your employer brand. So a couple of things that we want to mention ahead of time as housekeeping items. This is being recorded, and I will be sending an email out to everyone later today, whether they attended or not, so that you'll get a copy of this recording. You can come back and listen to it again. Also, all participants have been muted, but we do encourage you to participate through the chat function. So if you have any questions, we do have someone on standby to look over those and answer them throughout the webinar. Also, we're going to have about 10-15 minutes at the end of the webinar to address any questions that you have and kind of have a little more discussion there. So feel free to ask those questions throughout the webinar, though. You do not have to wait till the end to put those in. All right, let's get started. So your speakers, my name is Katie Mouton. I am the digital marketing specialist at Insala. I'm very excited to be part of this panel. I think it's going to be a lot of great information, and I'm going to just ask that each of our speakers give yourself a quick introduction. Let's start with Jeff.
Yes, hello everyone. This is Jeff Townsend. I am working with Insala on this webinar today. Really excited to be here. My background is in HR and talent management. Spent about 2 decades in the airline industry and then another 5 in healthcare. So really excited to talk about this. It's one of my passions to think about culture and brand when we think about our talent.
Great, thank you, Jeff. We're really excited to have you as part of our panel. All right, let's move on to Nick Jones.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, my name's Nick Jones, and I'm based in Insala's UK office. I'm a technologist by trade. I help support clients engage their communities of staff and employees and also former alumni, really at whichever stage of the employee career life cycle they're at. So I have a background touching upon HR in the main part, but I'm very excited as well to be here today to talk about the implications of a company's actions on their brand and essentially the ongoing issues that may cause. So I'm really interested in looking at what clients that I've been working with have been doing and sharing a few insights on that sort of respect.
Great, thank you, Nick. And last but certainly not least, the lovely Nita Von Gillern. Nita. Nita, if you're talking, I think you're on mute.
There you go. I don't know. I was trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Nita Von Gillern, and I'm in the HR People's Operations area. I come from a coaching background, and my role is really to ensure that our employees and clients have the best possible experience they can. And, I love values within a company because I truly feel that they are the foundation of who we are. So I'm really excited to talk about them today.
Great, thank you, Nita. All right. We have a lot of information to share, but we don't want to keep everyone too long, so we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so this is our agenda, and we're just going to go step by step, take each one of these points and have a nice discussion about those. All right, so let's start with the first agenda item. So the decisions you're making now will affect your employer brand. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about how these decisions are affecting your employer brand, and how organizations during this unprecedented time really should be thinking about the future. We know that a lot of really quick decisions are happening now as companies, deal with either having to close their doors, lay off their employees, really cut costs. And I want to start off by just passing it straight to you, Jeff. I think that you're going to have a lot to say about this topic.
Great, thank you, Katie. I think, I really want to throw out a couple of questions and just a couple of thoughts to get us going today. It's really about your decision making right now. Is that reinforcing your employer brand, or is it potentially diminishing that brand in the eyes of your employees? Just a question to think about. Something else, are you being transparent about decision making without causing any panic? Because in this time, whether you're doing a reduction in force or you have remaining employees or both, it's critical that you handle all those situations with dignity and respect, because these moments matter to your employer brand, both now and in the future. So you can think about that. If you're offering support services such as transition services or community connection networks, something to keep people engaged, think about those decisions, because how you maintain and continue relationships with all of these individuals and show that you care, that's going to matter in the long run. And it may, in fact, help people determine whether or not they do want to come back to work with you, or if they want to stay and work with you. This is going to be a very emotional time for many people. And the more we can do to make sure we're supportive by focusing on our employer brand and our values, the more successful we're going to be. Nick, I'm not sure what thoughts you may have on that, but I think you probably do have some information.
Absolutely, Jeff. Yeah, there's some very interesting considerations there. And I think firstly, and we do want to talk ad nauseum about things that people already know, but we are facing a completely unprecedented crisis where we're having to, and companies are having to plan overnight an unthinkable sort of scenario where high potential employees, for example, are having to be let go. And it's a situation that if you're in HR, it's not something you would have ever really countenanced under normal conditions. But really the paradigm has been flipped on its head, and we've had added complexity, and that companies have been given sort of a crutch to get through this period to a certain extent by having the furlough scheme that we have in the UK, but also there are significant loans available to US businesses that I'm aware of that are essentially giving organizations about how they address their workforce, and do they keep people on board, do they furlough them, do they choose to go in a number of directions which wouldn't have been there previously. If we're comparing the current economic condition and the pandemic response with the great financial crash of 2008 and 2009, there are many more directions to turn, and the inherent risk there for companies is that they perhaps don't do the right thing. They perhaps do not prioritize their core values that we're going to go on and speak about, and they perhaps make the wrong decision with their workforce. And there are a few different sort of liabilities that I see in my mind of companies doing. And one thing is that companies should not stop thinking about their employees' development through this period. And it's difficult to even sort of start thinking about that, but we think about the employer brand being really a sum of people's perceptions of the employer and how good an employer they are, how good they are to work for, how well they develop. If they let any of that career development go, then they're really ignoring a very large piece of what makes them a good employer. So you cannot put considerations about talent development and your staff's career development on hold during this time period. And we are going to talk about that a little bit more in one of the later agenda items, but that really struck me as very a very prevalent consideration at this time, that companies need to think about their existing employees as well as anybody that they may decide to furlough and others that they may decide to make redundant. So, and we're seeing already there have been a good few examples of companies which are hit a little bit more severely than others, particularly in the retail sector, the airline sector, which, Jeff, I know you've got a lot of insights in that particular area. Have had to obviously furlough people, and there is a huge risk of people suffering negative effects during this time period, more from mental health and a adaptation standpoint. Trying to work from home can be very challenging for people who are still within the organization. So yeah, have a number of stories that we can build on there. In terms of a couple of examples I'd mention, I do work with an oil and gas major as part of my day-to-day role, and some of their, I mean, they are hit probably more than any other sector. I mean, I think they've reported that 66% of their profit has been wiped out by coronavirus so far, given demand for oil has really just gone through the floor. And they've made a commitment to not make any redundancies in the first 3 months, whilst also paying their shareholders and trying to, so that what really has to give there is they're going to have to make an enormous amount of capital expenditure cuts. And one thing that might make companies think about doing is cutting things such as mentoring or talent development programs. So I think there is a very big risk at that point of companies not thinking and not continuing to invest in their employees during this time period, whereas the argument really is that they should be investing more. So that's an interesting consideration. I've been working with one oil and gas major who are certainly being very, very badly hit at the moment.
Yeah, Nick, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that goes directly back to the slide and the questions that we have listed right here, where it's what stories are your actions and behaviors telling? You know, what does it say to the outside world when you cut some of these programs that you have for your remaining employees, and what are your frontline employees going to say when this is all said and done? Because, you know, there is light at the end of the tunnel. We will go back to some semblance of normal. It'll never be the normal that we had in the past. But you have to think about how those decisions you're making now are going to affect people and what they're going to say at the end of this. I say end, I don't know if there is an end, but, you know, in the future, and how that's going to be perceived, because eventually for a lot of these organizations, they're laying people off or furloughing people. They're going to want to either rehire some of those employees or hire a new workforce. And you have to think about your employer brand, and you have to think about whether these people are going to want to come work for you, because I doubt that this is going to be the last time that something, maybe not exactly like this, but a situation like this where layoffs take place. It's happened before, it'll happen again. And if you don't have this protected employer brand with the decisions you're making today, it could really, really hurt your future when you're trying to bounce back. You need your workforce to be productive. If you don't have the employees that you need coming back to you or even being hired, it's not going to happen for you. So really taking that into consideration when you make your cuts, and how you communicate with your employees. I think Jeff made a really good point about that. Being transparent, being honest. Don't let them find out about decisions you're making in the media. Make sure that they're aware first. I know that if something happened with Insala, I wouldn't want to hear about my job on the news. I would absolutely want to hear it from my leadership team. So I think you both made some really great points for this agenda item. Does anyone have anything else to add before we move on to the next one?
Well, one consideration I would, HR director or anybody who's got any strategic resourcing responsibility at all, is we're coming from a context of near full employment, and that's particularly true that the labour market is exceptionally tight in white collar professions where there are very specialised skills, where companies falling over each other to employ certain groups. And what would happen to your business operations if, for example, one of your competitors, who's perhaps not as affected for whatever reason, manages to hire 30% of your talent back if you end up furloughing them. And I think those considerations are really things that people with a strategic responsibility for recruitment and retention need to be thinking about, that their current employees may not remain current employees, whether they're furloughed or whether they're still working from home and trying to adapt. And I think career development, from what we've seen, and talent development continuing is certainly part of the missing link, and keeping that sense of continuity and community within organizations. So, yeah, but I think that's part of the overall picture as well, just as one last comment on this area.
All right, thanks for that extra information, Nick. I think that was really just hit home the point of, these decisions are quick. A lot of these things are unexpected, but employer brand is something that you really have to keep in the back of your mind, because while it might not seem really important right now, in the future, it's definitely going to be. All right, moving on. So I know we've mentioned values a couple of times. So our next agenda item is preserve and leverage your organization's values. I found this quote. I thought it was really relevant to what we're talking about right now. Jeff, do you want to kind of kick off a little bit? I know you and Nick both mentioned values. What is your take on how we should preserve and leverage values during this time?
Sure, well, your values are actually the core of who the organization is, right? And that should be reflected in decision-making, communications, and basically when you're hiring people, we all know that there's a desire to hire for fit for the organization. And that's great, but once they're in the organization, what does that mean to them? And more importantly, if you look at the quote here, hire and fire based on them. If you're having to let people go, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, make sure you do that with your values in mind, because that will be reflected in the way those people talk about your organization in the future when they're gone. And also, it will remind them of the organization that they went to work for and why they went to work there in the first place. So it's really important that every experience your employees have is reflective of the values of the organization in one way or another. And in some ways, that may be individualized, or even down to the personal interactions, to think about what those values mean to each of those employees.
Yeah, Jeff, I think you make a great point there about what people are going to say in the future. With the world we live in today, everything's online, social media, review sites. It's very easy to go and look at an organization and learn what past employees, even current employees, think about their values and how they really implement those. And during this time, when you're unfortunately having to lay off more people or even furlough people, and try to engage your remaining employees, that's when these reviews and these comments and this information is really going to be important, because people are going to get a true sense of how you're preserving your values and how you're putting those into practice. Nick, did you want to add something to that?
I did, yeah. So, I mean, the imperative really is for an organization to be able to maintain their relationship through this period, and the values are certainly a way of them defining what they are and how they wish to go about it. I think there's two ways of looking at it. You really want to mitigate any negative outcome from having to lay off, as Jeff mentions. That one needs to be done in the best way possible. But there's also the more positive aspect that if you are able to get through this and you do have a way of engaging people that are going through some of these transition experiences and able to show them support at this time, then I can really maximize your chances of creating a wider and more productive network in the future, rather than just sort of letting people go and closing that down and letting it be the end of the story. Because if you consider that negative scenario where you've invested in the employee's journey and their experiences over the last sort of 5-10 years, if they have a slightly longer tenure, it's an enormous amount of investment just to let walk out the door. And also, there's an awesome amount of retained intellectual knowledge that you lose access to if you just let people go, and don't act in respect of your values effectively. So there are huge implications on that. There's a mitigation angle, but there's also a way of preserving your that relationship and what you can gain from it in the future. And it's really trying to think, which is very difficult at the moment, thinking beyond the pandemic and what the next sort of 6 months to 12 months will look like. I think we're fairly sure about how the next 3 or 4 months are going to pan out, but what are things going to be like in the new year? So yeah, it's really trying to take that longer term view. What are your long-term values?
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. I think that thinking long term is really important. A lot of people are so focused on what's happening right now, and you absolutely have to focus on what's happening right now. But it's also taking those values and making sure that you're staying true to them as you're moving towards the future. You know, I think at Insala, we do like to lead by example. So I thought we'd take some time and we'd go through some of our values and what we're currently doing right now to make sure that we're still being true to these values as we are moving throughout this time and with all the changes that are happening. Nita, I think that, you are the best person to speak about these, definitely. What would you like to share about what Insala is doing with our values?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie, and hello to everyone. Here at Insala, our values are like our GPS. They keep our actions focused and keep us going in the right direction. And I think ultimately, like Jeff said, they are a reflection of who we are, our brand. And here at Insala, we have 3 values, and many, many things fall under these 3 values, but this is kind of the big umbrella. And for us, it's just not these words, but it's really the meaning behind the words that are the essence of our actions. So for us, passion is energy that drives our actions. Integrity, so we hold ourselves to that our words match our actions. And lifelong learning, ongoing pursuit of knowledge. And so I'd like to share specifically some actions that we have taken, especially during this time, that are driven by our values. I want to start with how we've leveraged them to the individuals in our company, to our employees here at Insala. Literally overnight, our lives changed here at Insala, as for the world probably. And we are not a work from home company. While we have some that periodically work from home, within 2 days, we became 100% work from home company. So we immediately put together a work from home policy where our employees and the company have transparency. We signed it together, an agreement that this is what we're going to honor as we're all working from home. We held a webinar where people could have input, could ask questions, so we could support them in what working from home will look like. And then when this, the more that this transpired, the COVID, as we learned more and experienced more, I actually love it when we have meetings with Katie, and I know she has a 2-year-old and a 5 or 6-year-old, and we get to hear children in the background. You might hear, it's so funny, our COO, when we get on a meeting with him, he has one puppy that loves to bark when he gets online. And so we've got to be flexible. We've got to have a theme of empathy and some humor, as a value, because lives are very different for each person at home. We hold a weekly we call it our happy half hour. It's the new happy hour, where we get together globally as a team, put work completely aside. We play a fun game, so we're telling them we value fun, we value creating balance in your life. And one week we invited children, family members, people living with extended family right now during this time. So, you know, that's something fun for us to do as a team. We have a PIN award program that we've had in the company, but more than ever, it's very important now. It's a program where we do a shout out, a recognition of above and beyond contributions that people do. You know, this keeps our team being cohesive. It motivates people. It creates transparency on what people are doing. Something that's really important also that we believe in our values is that we have a strong leadership team that communicates authentically with transparency. And I think Katie said a little bit earlier, you know, people want to know what's going on. That helps alleviate the fear. So we have a team global meeting every week. Our leadership team meets every week to try to stay ahead of what's going on. You know, this is what I call a dynamic change management. This is a time like none other where we've had to be really innovative to see how we're going to lead our business, our team members, our clients. And the transparent communication, while it's not always easy, you know, it's very necessary because it really alleviates the uncertainty that everybody's experienced beyond their jobs, you know, to their whole lives. So we asked our leadership team to communicate with an email telling what is the state of the company, where are their jobs, in what direction are we heading. And really, we've gotten really positive response there that people want to know, you know, what's going on. We've offered coaching, mentoring, trying to look at each individual as what their needs are as they're navigating this situation. We have employment assistance program. While all of these programs are really awesome, but I think the value that makes them valuable is acceptance and being non-judgmental, you know, telling people it's okay to reach out and ask for help to do these things. That's why we have them. And I'd like to end or wrap up with our commitment to live these values with our clients. We ask our team member to, when communicating with our clients and really with anybody, to start off first and lead with, you know, empathy and kindness. Ask, you know, how are you doing? Acknowledge the situation that we're in right now that is very challenging, you know, wish them well, and then go into business. You know, we're being very flexible with our clients, you know, understanding that things are very, very different from them now, for them now. We're checking in with them as much as we can. We're offering, you know, consulting services to keep their product updated and relevant. Most of our products have menu structures that allow for you to add a menu item that says COVID-19, helping them load content that is relevant to their business and to their clients. You know, so these are some of the ways that we have used our values to help guide our actions in these really, you know, challenging times. And I think I want to end with, you know, the theme that we've experienced of our values during the last couple of months have been important to us is, you know, empathy, communicating honestly with transparency, remind people to have fun, keep their lives in balance, you know, to be flexible. Things are changing every day. And we have really been challenged in lifelong learning. We've had to learn a lot about this new experience and really on a day-by-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita, for sharing just a little bit about what we're doing. I hope that gave you all some ideas on how you can keep your values in mind when you're making decisions. I know for me personally, as Nita said, I do have 2 young children. I also have a husband whose job is not flexible, cannot be flexible. So one of the things that drew me into working for Insala in the first place was the flexibility and the understanding in my individual situation that while I do have a husband and a partner to help raise my children, there are times when I feel like a single mother, when he has to be at work and there's no flexibility for him to help me. So being able to work for an employer who allows me that flexibility is super important. And that has gone tenfold during this process. My kids are home with me full time right now. And, Nita said, you hear him in the background. My 2-year-old likes to scream when he wants something. And everyone just takes it with stride and we all laugh about it. And I think that for me, that just solidifies the reasonings that I joined this company and the reasonings that I don't want to go anywhere. It's something that keeps me very engaged and it helps me want to work hard and be more productive, even though it is difficult being a mom and being, someone working for a company right now and having that focus happening at the same time. So I think that keeping those things in mind for your remaining employees and also having that passion and flexibility, or I should say compassion and flexibility, also with the people who are leaving. It's not just about your remaining employees. It's about continuing to engage and have that relationship with those people that you've had to furlough or that have become redundant, and opening those lines of communication when we are able to get an email from our CEO, directly from him speaking to us, sometimes individually about our own situation and just reaffirming that we're important and we're valued. That does something to help us become more engaged. So I think having that individual touch, if you can, obviously it's a little easier for smaller companies, is really important, especially in a time like this. And that keeps your employer brand front of mind. And a lot of people will remember those things on the other side of this. Does anyone have anything else to share about values before we move on?
Well, I think really just to comment on how difficult it is for employers, and particularly as you mentioned at the end, Katie, we're in a little bit of a good position that we're a small company and we have a sort of more personal relationship with our management, whereas for sort of larger dispersed companies, then it can be very difficult. And the shift away from offices, there's no guarantees that's going to go back to normal anytime soon. And indeed, I'm speaking to one client that is potentially looking to close down a couple of offices so that it can keep people on board and not have to make any redundancies. So people are going to have to kind of get used to this situation. How that relates to values is that companies are going to have to engage and interact more intelligently and with more emotional intelligence to their employees. Because there is a lot that we lose from not being in the office, that sort of osmotic transfer of ideas and knowledge and just being around other people in the work environment, I think has been lost. And companies need to be mindful about how to replace it and how the employer brand might suffer as a result if people become disconnected and disengaged. So yeah, some really interesting considerations that sprung to mind there for me.
All right, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Nita.
Katie,
Yes.
I just wanted to mention something that came to mind to me because with our mentoring product, where I have just seen companies who have a strong mentoring program where, people have a that they can go to get, experience and strength from, especially during times like this. And so I've seen where our clients who have used our mentoring product and have really established mentoring programs, a support system that they have there for their employees. And I love a feature that we have in that product that's called Flash Mentoring, where people can put out there their specialty. And then if you just have one moment, one question, something you need to connect on, not on a long-term relationship, but just flash right now quickly. Let's say for a mom at home, how do you deal with having kids at home during this and conduct meetings? You can just reach out and there's somebody there in your program that you can just connect with instantly to do that with. So I just wanted to share that because it came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, Nita. In having that individual support, our leadership teams are super busy right now. They're trying to figure out all the ins and outs of this and trying to keep everyone employed and keep the businesses going. And so having someone there to support you, like you do in a mentoring relationship, even if it is just flash mentoring and it's very quick and getting to the point. I think that having that speaks volumes. All right. Let's move on. So exploring the employee journey. I feel like this is a big one. As you can see, we have a little graphic, and this is kind of how the employee journey goes. And as you can see, it's a circle, so it's going to go all the way around. And we are going to talk a little bit about that. Jeff, would you like to kind of give us a high-level overview of your thoughts on this?
Yes, thanks, Katie. What I really think is interesting about the employee journey, as Katie pointed out, it's cyclical here. A lot of people think of it as linear. You start with the organization, and eventually, at some point, you leave through retirement or whatever, some other opportunity comes along, whatever it is that you separate. But really, the attraction component is what a lot of, I think, organizations fail to think about when they think about the journey. And it's really your reputation as an employer and in the marketplace. And I'm sure you can all think of organizations out there that have really good consumer reputations. And a lot of people want to apply to work for them just based on that reputation. So something to think about there is that in that attraction phase is really more about your employer brand in the marketplace. When people are really considering who they may want to work for. I will go around this very quickly. When you get to the select phase, of course, that's when you're bringing people on board. And then you've got your onboarding phase, engaging, developing, and then progressing. And I wanted to get around this quickly because I think something we need to think about is when people progress in the organization, you still are wanting to attract them to stay, right? That's your retention plan. How do you get them to want to stay and progress within the organization, either vertically or horizontally? These are of interest to them. But there is the separation component, again, involuntarily or voluntarily. At some point, these folks may come back to work for you, whether as a gig employee, contractor, so to speak, or whether they come back full time. And in times like this, when you think about those that are furloughed, you still want to maintain that positive employer brand, through your values and the way you've communicated and kept them engaged, so that they are willing to come back to you, and that they can bring that knowledge that Nick mentioned, that institutional knowledge and those relationships back with them. So, I mean, that's my real thought there is what stories are they going to be telling during this time and 5 years from now about that experience? And is it something that would, warrant others to want to look at your organization as an employer? So if you do this well, it's really a virtuous cycle by reinforcing your employer brand. It's those moments that can either make your brand or tarnish it, and create those stories you either want to have told or those that you would rather not have told. And so that's really the cycle of this rather than the linear view on the employee journey. And I think Nick wants to talk a little bit about engaging and developing, so I can let him, I'll turn it over to him now to do that.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. And it's a really good point, that it really could go either way for companies and how they handle this situation. And I think from the employee's perspective, you don't really judge your employer for being in a difficult trading position or their business model becoming outdated and not perhaps working as well as it once did. They're not the kind of things that we're going to start judging an employer or start having a negative perception because of that. But we do judge them on how they respond to us and treat us as humans and recognize us and have an appreciation of where we are in our career and what we want to do. So as we're going round the employee journey, and one key part after users have been onboarded and ramped up and are effectively doing their job for that organization, and this is typically after the 1 year mark, we get through to the employees that really want to engage. And this is particularly important, as we've mentioned already at the moment, because it's actually really difficult to engage people currently. A lot of employees are falling into I'm trying to find the right adjective, sort of not a slumber, but perhaps a languor and a frustration with this ongoing being essentially confined to our homes, as most white collar workers are currently. So we have had a renewed interest from a number of organizations we already work with in virtual mentoring and being able to connect and engage people more effectively. And I think, as I mentioned a few times already, that is one of the big authentic engagement that actually allows the user to, or the employee to develop their career, which is the next stage. Whether or not they decide to stay or they move on to other climates, the development part is absolutely key to how they will exit this employee journey or go on to the next stage of it. And having a system and strategy to be able to do that takes account of us being really dispersed, not in the same office, perhaps struggling with our own individual situations, and having an appreciation for that, which are arguably, there are a number of strategies that really account for that, is key to getting people to develop. And whether or not they stay with you is another question. Obviously, we want people to stay with us. But another interesting insight, and this is drawn from a lot of research that Insala's done, and we've been around for around 25 years, so we have experienced, not myself personally, but we do have people in business who've experienced things like the dot-com bubbles, I believe there's some other crashes in the early 2000s, the great financial crash, and there are certain patterns. The pandemic and how things are unraveling are completely novel in some ways, but employees will take a number of different routes at this point. It could be anything from retraining, could be at some point people might actually just choose this as an opportunity to retire if they were already planning that. There could be other options to retrain, to start their own business, to perhaps move to a different company that's not as affected as the pandemic. So it's a moment, I suppose, in the employee journey that has, as with companies, we've looked at the company's perspective, there are a baffling array of choices that perhaps weren't there before. There are a number of different avenues that an employee can go down. And the important thing is that, and what can be valuable for an organization, is being able to support the employee through that and allow them to choose what works for them, what direction it's good for them to go in, whether it's retraining, whether it's moving to a different position within the organization. So I think that as part of this continuum, this cycle, I think that's dramatically important part, and particularly because of the situation at the moment and the strategic issues and hurdles that's put in our way. So that's really my thoughts on the matter. And I'm speaking to a number of companies that are taking different strategies and different approaches. They are in different industries, but technology has been people staying connected, as we know, in this period. So and importantly making fans of your employees, your organization, and hopefully come back and work for you once things have straightened out. So yeah, just a few thoughts there. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add from the panel, but certainly a lot of good ideas there.
Yeah, Nick, I think that I liked what you said at the very end of all of that wonderful information, but it's remembering that yes, you need to help your remaining employees, engage them, but it's really important through this journey that you're helping your transitioning employees either come back around or move on. Like you said, they have a ton of options at this point of different things that they could do. They have a decision to make, and if you're a part of that decision, then you do have the option of rehiring them in the future. I know for a lot of organizations that is something that they're looking to do. My husband used to work in the oil industry, and when there were layoffs, there were many times when they went back and they rehired those people as soon as they could, because they had the expertise and they do need them. And that's something that we are going to talk about in the future as well. So I think that was a really great point to make. I am going to move us forward because I don't want us to run out of time. All right, so our last agenda item is really create a plan for what's next. We've mentioned your story quite a few times through. It's been a theme kind of throughout this webinar, is your story. What story are you telling? What story do you want other people to tell about you? And right now is the time that you really have the option and the chance to grab your story, get hold of it, and really make it what you want it to be, and manage how people perceive it and what's being said about your employer brand, which is going to be so important for you in the future when that's going to be a big focus. We've got a great quote at the top that Jeff actually sent to me. So Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Katie. It's a quote that I learned through a session that I took with the Disney Institute, and I think what's really critical here is that it's the power of story. And Walt Disney Corporation isn't just an entertainment company; they're a storytelling company. That's how they look at themselves. And whether it's through the theme parks or the films or whatever other engagement they may have with their customers, it's about telling a story. And so it's really critically important for them to think about that in their interactions every day with customers, but also with employees, and particularly as leaders, to demonstrate what you value through the story you're telling by your actions. And I think that's the most critical thing we can think about right now, taking it all the way back to the very first agenda topic, is what are we doing today to reinforce your employer brand? How are you protecting that? And the decisions you're making really do tell a story. And the way you do interact with people tells a story. And that's the point here, is that every moment you have an opportunity to tell the story you want to tell, I think you're telling.
Yeah, Jeff, and I agree, and we did put some tips here on how you can do that. So, I mean, first and foremost, you've got to think about what's coming next, and that's something we've said repeatedly, is thinking about the future and how you'll respond to it. Also, to include everyone in your plan, even the employees that you have furloughed or that you've made redundant. Jeff and I, when we talked during a meeting yesterday, he made some really good points about that, is open the communication. We've mentioned it a couple of times. Be transparent. We don't, these people don't want to see your decisions coming from a different source. They want it straight from you. So remember those people who might have left your organization, because they're just as important to you right now as your remaining employees. Another point we wanted to make was to change your practices to better align with your new normal. I'm doing air quotes. There's also quotes on the slide, but there's air quotes happening over here, because nothing's normal for us right now. And we don't know when it's going to get back to that. We don't know if it's ever going to get back to that. So changing your practices, keeping your values in mind when you change those practices, so that you can better align to help your employees, to help your organization. Making sure that everyone is on board with this. So leadership teams are great. They're also really busy right now. Go to your direct managers, teach them the practices that should be in place so that they can help their direct reports through this. Nita mentioned the mentoring aspect of this. Absolutely, having a person there for you is so big right now. A lot of us are struggling with, like I said, my kids are here. That's hard for me. So having a sounding board on how to manage that, and having the flexibility to move my schedule around if I need to. And those are practices that I'm having to put into place to get around my new normal. Also, just being flexible. These times are uncertain. They're going to remain this way for a while. So, create a plan for what's next, but it's not set in stone. Make sure that you're flexible with that plan, and that you're constantly keeping an eye on what's happening with your employees, with your furloughed or redundant employees, and how you need to change that plan around to work for your organization and your workforce. That's my spiel for this slide. Does anyone have anything that they want to add before we kind of wrap up and get to the questions?
This is Jeff again. Just one thing real quickly. I think there's a real opportunity here. Nick mentioned something about retraining, and I think if you think about redeployment, some people may be able to come back in different roles before they would in their typical role. And so if there's an opportunity to do that, think about your current employees that are out there furloughed at the moment, rather than going out and hiring fresh off the street. There are some folks who may be able to be redeployed into different roles, at least on a temporary basis. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's a great point there, Jeff. And we have been a couple of projects that have been organised by central government. I think perhaps they are uniquely placed to be able to consider these sort of redeployment projects, but it's essentially getting people to stay within the same organisation, but not losing those particular skill sets. and minimizing disruption in that way. So if organizations of a certain scale, I suppose governments are always going to be at that size, then that's definitely an option they should consider.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff and Nick. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our time here. If you have any questions, pop those into the questions box right now and we'll get to those. Before we get there, I do want to let everyone know that we're going to have a follow-up webinar to this one. So I wanted to invite all of you to attend. So it's on rehiring your workforce. We're going to focus on how you can transition your furloughed or laid off employees, how you can continue to engage them during that transitioning process, and then how you can hire them back to your workforce so that they can, again, be productive employees for you. This webinar is going to take place on May 12th, same time, and we're going to have a lot of the same people that were on this panel, and we might have a few more people joining us. So I really hope that you can attend. I think it's going to be a really great discussion. All right, we're going to move on to the questions. So I do see one question that I wanted to put out there for our panelists. So someone asked, how do you ensure that your crisis media management and proactive marketing and communications are a key consideration for an organization when they're so occupied with operational management? All right, Jeff or Nick, do you want to take this question?
Sure, if I understand correctly, I think really referring to what is the messaging that's going out in the market right now, and how are leaders able to focus on that while they're focused on so much of this downturn and this challenge. I think the real crucial component here is to make sure you're marketing the same story to the organization, to the people who are there, to the people who are furloughed, as you're telling in the marketplace. I mean, I think that's a critical way to leverage, the message to both audiences at the same time. It's not dual effort. Really, it's the same message. In some ways, it's to your employees that you care, and you're going to help them through this. And in the market, I think you need to share that you're working to care for your customers now and in the future. And I don't think it's a bad idea to also share how you're caring for your employees with the market. I think that goes a long way for your brand reputation in the marketplace as well as your employer brand.
Yep. Companies need to wean themselves off this day-to-day operational focus, and people at some point need to start planning the months ahead and reiterating the negative impacts of not doing that, and potentially the positive impacts as well, because there are those for companies that get the planning right in this stage and invest in their employees. I think it's a really important message for companies, and particularly at that strategic senior management level, which crisis comms and crisis marketing and management really should be decided at that level, is one they have to think about. It's moving from the day-to-day view to the week-to-week and then the month-to-month. And at some point, hopefully when we have something resembling some stability and normality, we can do crazy things such as 5-year plans, which we used to think about. But at the moment, it's perhaps what's happening in 6 months.
Yeah, and I think, as someone who runs a marketing department, I think that keeping everyone on the same page is just really important. And, we have to be very careful about what we're saying in our social media posts, what my emails say that are going out to our audience and especially our clients, to make sure that everyone is speaking the same language. We all have the same message, because at the end of the day, that's going to really affect your employer brand. So just keeping that in mind, I think, is super important. Thank you for that question. I think that was a really good one to keep the conversation going. Let me look. I'm not sure I'm seeing any other questions, and we are at about time right now. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. I do want to mention that we did put the link to the next webinar in the chat box. So if you want to go click on that, you can register for that on our website, and you'll get the link for that in your email. Before we wrap up, does anyone on the panel have anything else that they would like to add to the conversation?
think one thing that I would, if there was somebody with a strategic HR mindset, I would always implore them to certainly invest in their employees. Now is more important to do that than ever, and be flexible in doing so, and try something new to engage and develop, because it's arguable that will be pay an even bigger dividend once things are back to some sort of sense of normalcy. So I think there is a real opportunity to be proactive and innovative in terms of how we develop and engage employees at the moment.
All right, thank you, Nick. I do want to point out that all of our contact information is on the screen right now. If you think of any questions later on, or if you rewatch and something comes up for you, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We'd love to hear from you and have a continued conversation on this. I hope that everyone found this informative and helpful in your journey to protect your employer brand during COVID-19. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you all stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.